Number 16, the graph of y equals cosine x is on the domain of 0 to 2 pi is shown. If the domain were changed to negative 2 pi to 0, find the zeros in extrema. So here's what's happening. The domain refers to the x. It goes from 0 to 2 pi, and we're saying we want to extend it the other way. So instead of being from 0 to 2 pi, it's going to go from 0 to negative 2 pi. So this one would be about right here. I'm going to say this is negative pi, and this here is where we'll finish off at negative 2 pi. So if we were going to reflect this back, what we'd have is, notice that the minimum occurs at pi, at negative pi, so over here. So as I reflect it over, this would come through, and it's going to cross this point right there, by the way, is pi over 2. If you think about your hand trick, you can figure that out. So wherever pi over 2 is, right here, that's where this graph should cross through as it approaches the minimum there. And so I'll put a negative pi over 2. And then it comes up, and at 3 pi over 2 is where it's going to hit this 0 again as it approaches its maximum value here at negative 2 pi. So this would be negative 3 pi over 2. And so now it says find the zeros. So the zeros would be these 2 points here and here. I didn't really get that in the graph. So you'd list the x-axis first. So the zeros would be at negative pi over 2, comma 0, and the other occurs at negative 3 pi over 2, comma 0. And then the extrema would be the maximums and minimums. So I'll break those up and say the maximum occurs right here. Let me change colors. The maximum occurs right here, and this is negative 2 pi, comma height of 1. So that would be the max, negative 2 pi, comma 1. And the minimum would occur right here, which would be at negative pi, comma negative 1. And so this will be the minimum. Well, you could go to your table and try to find those. The problem is with the pi's, it won't be, this is like negative 3.14, which on the x's, they usually on the table, if you went to graph and just graph y equals cosine, or just put in a cosine x here. The problem is it's on the table not going to give you, when you press Control T here, it's not going to, it counts as the x as whole numbers. It's not going to give you pi unless you go and you have to press menu and change the table settings if you wanted to do that. So the table start, we would maybe put in negative 2 pi. Sorry about the. And now what I'll do here is a table step. I want it to h mark to be pi over 2. And so what I'll do is I'll do here pi divided by 2. That's what this table step means, how much each marking would be. And so now if I do that, I get the points that negative 2 pi, it should have its maximum, although it's hard to see. And, well, I don't know what's going on here, why it's not giving my values correctly. The zeros are right, but I'm not really sure what's going on with this part, because at negative pi, obviously the value should be negative 1. Maybe it's because of my mode here. Let me change this to radians. Maybe that's messing with my table. There it goes. It was a mode problem. So now at negative 2 pi, you have the maximum. At negative, this would be 3 pi over 2. You get it to 0. This is negative pi. At negative 1, this is negative pi over 2. You get the 0, and so on and so forth. That's how you do it in the graph.